Now, though, plenty to debate on the show. The renewal of a debate, in fact, it's almost as old as the artefacts it's about. Should Britain return the spoils of empire to the countries they were originally taken from? The British Museum has revealed close to 2,000 historic pieces worth millions were stolen by one of its senior curators. And now Greece is using this opportunity to demand the return of the Elgin marbles held by the museum in London. They claim thefts have shattered the myth that it's the best and safest place, the UK, to hold these types of artefacts. Joining me to discuss all of this, the co-chair of the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Council, Kofi Mawuli Klu, former UKIP MEP Roger Helmer, and former Labour advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Thank you, gentlemen, for making time this evening. Let's get stuck right in. Kofi, why is it necessary, in your mind, that these types of artefacts should be returned?
Well, they should be returned because they belong to the people from whom they've been stolen. They've been literally brought here through criminal, acts of armed robbery, and it is about time, if people are waking up to these crimes, to atone for them and to meet the demands for reparatory justice that Africans and other colonized peoples are actually highlighting at this time. Then it is about time that we actually talked about what to do with them. And it is, engaging with the communities that have an interest in this matter, who must be seen as co-custodians. These are World Heritage, treasures right now. And it is for us to deal with them as matters of reparatory justice, in which case, for us as in the International Social Movement for African Reparations, what we are calling for, of which PACO is part, what we are calling for is let's have an all-party, commission for truth and reparatory justice, we call the APCITAJ. Let's bring everybody around the table and let's discuss how we handle this World Heritage treasure. So we are not part of those who say, return them. Return them to whom, how, to where? If in the British Museum they can be stolen, then, if you take it to these corrupt governments and so-called misleaders we have in places like Africa today, you can be sure that they will disappear right back. So what we are saying is that let's call everybody around the table, and as co-custodians of World Heritage treasures, let's see what best we can all do about it.
Let's get our facts right. You say it's armed robbery. Certainly in the case of the Benin bronzes, what was done was legal in terms of international law at that time. In the case of the Elgin marbles, they were sold or given to Lord Elgin. So let's finish with this armed robbery,
But whose international law are you talking about?
The international law as it stood at the time.
Come on, you violated laws of the peoples of whom these robberies and criminalities were conducted. This white supremacy racist attempt to think that, anything conceived in Europe can be imposed upon the world, and that becomes...
And your idea that anything done by Europe is wrong.
No, that is not what I'm talking about.
I am very tired.
I'm going to let James, please, because obviously it's an impassioned debate. A lot of people do agree that these artefacts were originally stolen. It's the repatriation process or the returning. Should it be collaborative, or should we be keeping them here?
I think what Kofi said is basically correct, that there should be a collaborative process to take the ones back to the places that they were taken from. And we all think that theft is wrong. We think that this curator who's allegedly taken 2,000 pieces, we think that's wrong. So we should think it's wrong that they were taken in the first place. And there might be some artefacts that are best placed in the British Museum because, for the reasons Kofi was saying, they can't go back to where they are, or they'll be seen by more people. But when those ones are displayed, they should have the history of how they were taken and how they ended up there as part of the permanent exhibition, so that the museum is not just a museum of some objects, but it's also a museum of history and how those objects have come to be in front of the people.
But the logic of this position is that if we are saying that all foreign artefacts must be returned, you will end up where an English museum only has English artefacts, where a Nigerian museum only has Nigerian artefacts, an American museum only has American artefacts. Anybody who wishes to study the history of human culture over a long period would have to make a world tour in order to see all these exhibits. The great thing about the British Museum is that you get the whole thing together and you can study the whole thing in one place. But and the same applies to other major museums in Europe and in America.
But who says Britain has a right to, hold onto stolen goods, particularly those brought here through criminal acts of, crimes against humanity like war, enslavement, invasion, and so on and so on. Britain has no such right. These are world treasures. This belongs to all of humanity, but we need to bring everybody around the table so that they are no longer war loots.
If it belongs to all of humanity, then why are we returning them to a particular
No, because
place?
Britain has no right to have taken them from there in the first place through just crimes against humanity.
James.
Many people lost their lives
through
through
the
that.
other way around, and the Kingdom of Ashanti had colonised Britain and had taken back, for example, Stonehenge, and that was displayed in Kumasi, you would be sitting here saying, no, we should have those back. That's part of our heritage, that's part of our culture, and that would be a perfectly reasonable thing. Now, then, what should the museum director in Kumasi say? They should say, well, how are they going to be displayed? How can we work with you to display them in the way that's going to most show to the most people what they are and that pays respect to the culture from which they came from? It, in the case of Stonehenge, comes from the southwest of England.
2,000 years ago, the Romans colonised Britain. I don't know what they took, but I dare say they took a fair bit of stuff. So far as I know, nobody is demanding the return of any such materials. So how far back are you going to go in history?
Well,
But we would know if they were things that we really wanted back. We would be aware. If Italy was holding on to
Because
something
it was
the Romans
2,000 years
took.
ago, we will probably have forgotten.
What about the idea?
The point is that, crime in the past, particularly crimes of armed robbery, through genocide and ecocide upon, millions of people, right, that cannot be justified under any circumstances.
I've given you two cases where it was not a crime of armed robbery.
That's your opinion, but most people think
the Elgin
otherwise.
Marbles
Most people
were
in this
purchased off the
country think
Ottomans who
otherwise.
were occupying at the time. So it's a deal between essentially a colonial power, a wannabe colonial power, and an occupying power. It's hardly a fair
but
trade.
in terms of Lord Elgin, it was done in a legitimate way. What had happened to them beforehand was not his concern.
What do you think? What do you feel about the idea of having replicas? Your point about, if you return everything to its home country, you'll never be able to observe things from other countries in our own. I think that's a reasonable line of argument.
Yeah.
What about the idea of replicating artefacts?
I drove here from the station, or I was driven in a taxi. We passed Madame Tussauds. Now, Madame Tussauds is interesting, and people go and see it. But what people really want to see is the original. I can buy a copy of the Mona Lisa, and I can frame it up nicely and hang it in my home and say, there is the Mona Lisa. But actually, nobody will be excited to come and see my copy. They're interested to go and see the original that the original artist worked on. And I think that is a fundamental difference. Of course, we could make
copies. Who has the right to see the original? Europeans in here on the basis of crimes against humanity that have impact up to today in terms of devaluing human life and also dehumanizing Europeans.
Well,
right?
This
whole white supremacy, racist arrogance of, we've stolen and we hold on to
As you said to me,
goods.
Kofi, a few moments ago, that's your opinion. But it is not an opinion which I share.
But this is an opinion, millions of people, the majority of humanity who's been subjected to these crimes against humanity, hold these views. So the point is this: we either do it in a civilized way where we all come around the table and look at these, world heritage treasures of humanity and pull resources together in terms of where they can best be placed, for everybody to have, the benefit of learning from them in order to reorder our present and for a better
I'll
life.
allow the final.
But you cannot keep holding on to them, with imperialist arrogance.
I'll allow the
because
final
those
word to
days are
James.
finished and our people are speaking with their feet. and
James,
they will take
quickly,
it back.
do you think we're able to do this civilly?
We should be able to. The British Museum has a huge opportunity to do some leadership on this. It should do an audit of what it has. It should publish that. It should reach out to everyone who's involved, and it should put in its permanent collection how it got everything, so that we know when we go and we can see what the objects are and how they got there.
Gentlemen, what a debate. I found that fascinating. Thank you so much for coming in.